So this video is probably a product of boredom more than it is anything. I've been pretty sick for about 2 days and really sick for about 4 or 5 days, starting from last weekend. But so boredom breeds whatever, right? Wanting to make a dumbass video. But I wanted, I've been thinking about making a video, making a series of videos for a while, but about different things, just really different stuff, not just politics. But of course, being the conservative that I am, this first one is going to be about politics. But I want to do something a little bit different here. I don't want to get into Trump. I mean, that's a whole different discussion, who Trump is, his big mouth, that kind of stuff. Though I support most of his political policies. I want to talk about the issues that are at hand, in particular because of the primaries and Super Tuesday just happening the other day, and Biden coming out looking a lot better than what people thought. And there's a number of issues, obviously, but a couple of hotbed issues. One, I want to talk about socialism. Because I think there's a misconception about socialism in this country today, at least partially in a certain section of the population. Socialism. So I'm just going to tell you what I think about socialism. Socialism, on the surface, sounds really good, and more importantly, when socialism or approaching socialism, and I'll talk a little bit about that, often works really well up front, because it's just by nature a design that works well out of the gate, does okay for a good long while, but ultimately, historically, always fails. And notice that word "always." I do mean it always fails. There has never, ever in the history of this world been an example of socialism that succeeded for any serious length of time. And I don't mean 5 years or 10 years or even 15 or 20. There have been some examples and some current examples of socialism working in some of the countries in Europe, Sweden, the Netherlands, that get used a lot as examples of how good socialism really works. But they're struggling over there, and they're paying crazy, well over 50% tax. I think it's up to 57% in one of those countries. And that starts getting crazy. And that's when socialism starts to break down. Because ultimately, even though the government is running the program, ultimately the people are paying for the program. It's funded by taxes. So, socialism is about who's running the program, not who's paying for it. Whether it's capitalism or independent insurance, group insurance, however you want to say it, or food or any other social programs, ultimately people are paying for it. The government doesn't make money, okay? The country makes money based off of the people in the form of taxes and in business. So make no mistake, you're paying for socialism. And what happens is the cost of the programs begin to go so high that eventually you can't afford it. And here's the interesting part about that. That's the complaint today, is that you can't afford it. So basically what you're doing when you're talking about letting the government run programs and be in charge of making sure everybody gets what they're supposed to get, right? That you got to pay for that. And the other knock on socialism is that if you combine socialistic style healthcare with socialistic style business and income. And what I mean by that is you work with the idea and the mentality that the rich are should quit getting richer and the poor deserve more. Whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent, okay, that's a whole separate issue. And there's some truth to that. But if you go so far as to equalize that, while at the same time running social health care, what you wind up with is a lack of desire for people to be a higher educated professional. And in the case of healthcare, that means healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, surgeons, specialists. Those people go to college for, 10 years in some cases. And so the amount of money that they make is not just based on the services that they provide. It's also based on what it took to learn how to provide those services. I mean, not everybody can pick up a scalpel and open your chest up and fix your heart vessels. That's a little bit more difficult than being a welder or even being an engineer in some cases. So, the bottom line is that what winds up happening is that those people don't have the same desire and push and motivation to become those kinds of professionals because there's not going to be any value in it for them. And so what they wind up doing traditionally, eventually, is going to places where they can get the return on their investment for what they've invested in their careers and their lives. And so ultimately what you wind up with is healthcare winds up costing too much and the services just aren't as good. Now, Canada is another example of government-ran healthcare. Though you can get your own private insurance still in Canada and couple that along with the government-ran healthcare. And in Canada right now, there's a little bit of a mixed bag because it's not like they're behind us in treating critical illnesses. Like if you have a heart attack in Canada, you're probably going to get pretty good treatment. If you've got stage 3 cancer, you're probably going to get pretty good treatment. Where your treatment is going to fail is in the things that we take for granted in this country. Your knee starts hurting and it starts to immobilize you. You're going to struggle to get in to see a doctor about that because it's not a priority. And it may be your priority, but it's not the government's priority. Their priority is in making sure that it takes care of those critical illness patients. And so, for instance, I've got a brother-in-law. It took him it took him like a year. I mean, I don't know the exact timeline, but we talked about it many times. And he limped around literally for a year, and it caused him to struggle on his job just to get in to get an MRI on his knee and to figure out what was wrong with it. You got the common cold, you're going to struggle. You're not going to be able to make an appointment for the next day like many people in this country can do. So, the bottom line is that, whether it's healthcare, whether it's programs like welfare, which we already have in this country, the more socialistic that you get, you're going to start seeing critical failures. The next thing to talk about socialism is socialism versus socialistic, right? Every country has elements of socialistic style programs, welfare, healthcare, which we already have some in this country. Medicaid, Medicare are socialistic style healthcare additives. Our private insurance is not. Now, I'm not trying to make the case for the current system being the correct system. What I am making the case for is that the socialistic system is not the correct system. That's the case that I'm making. So people confuse sometimes socialism with socialistic programs, of which we have many in this country. And the trick is to walk the tightrope wire between having enough of those type programs to take care of people that really need to be taken care of while still preserving the capitalistic type society that this country was built on and founded on. And turning healthcare 100% over to the government is not a good play. It's not a good play. And if you don't believe me, you can read about the problems that the countries that are doing that are now beginning to experience now that they've gotten 15, 20, and in some cases even 30 years into those systems. And it's crushing them. It's absolutely crushing them. So the next issue I want to talk about is economics. This idea that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer is partially true. And that's always been a problem. When you got somebody who's starving and they're homeless, and right down the street from them is somebody living in a 3-story house who has ridiculous cars in their driveway, and probably could afford to take care of a lot of people with some of their financial wealth and freedoms, it doesn't feel fair. It just doesn't feel fair. And I get that. Sometimes it doesn't feel fair to me either. But there's a couple of things to remember about that. One, within the homeless society, you're always going to have a group that is not exactly what's being presented to you as the group that deserves what you're talking about. One, you're going to have you're going to have a lot of drug addicts. You're going to wind up finding out that there's a lot of people who actually prefer being homeless. Although, believe me, if you're willing to give them a house and tell them that they don't have to pay for it, they'll be happy to take advantage of that. But if you give them the choice to work versus being homeless, a good number of them will actually choose being homeless. Now, that certainly does not represent the entire homeless population. And there are a lot of people out there who are struggling, who are good, hardworking people that need a leg up. The thing that people are forgetting about is that we already have systems in place to help those people. In this country, with the current systems that are out there, that many of which are being abused, but under the current system, someone who is homeless, that has a strong work ethic or a strong desire to do something better with themselves, they actually already have the opportunity to do that. And the ones that can and want to typically will take advantage of that. And when I say take advantage of that in that context, I mean that in a good way. They will use the system and the net that's out there for them, and they will rise up and they will get back on their feet. When you see people that have those systems available to them, and 5 years later, they are still talking about how they're struggling, there's a problem with the person. That's just the reality. There's a problem with the person at that point. And so it's not fair to say that this program doesn't need socialistic style systems and safety nets to help people who have fallen on hard times. It is fair to say, however, that they can't be open-ended systems. And so there's a tightrope wire in between there. And being realistic about where that tightrope wire is the key here. You can't say blanketly, feed all the homeless, house all the homeless on somebody else's dime. And at the same time, you can't pretend like that there's not people out there that deserve a hand up and deserve for this country to invest some time and money into them to get them back on their feet. The truth is that the truth is in the middle somewhere. It doesn't belong in socialism, and it doesn't belong 100% in greedy capitalism either. So Bernie Sanders' idea of socialism is way too far left. It's way too far left. Now, maybe some other people's is way too far right. There are some people out there who would cancel every program known to man. And that's not right either. So what we need to do is we need to quit being so black and white in this country about these type issues. There's a meeting of the minds in the middle that takes care of people who deserve to be taken care of and allows people who make choices and decisions about how they want to live that cost them long term to be in a bad situation. It allows them to stay right where they want to be. And you're never going to get rid of that. You're never going to get rid of that. Let me give you an example. See this shirt I got on? Of course, it's mirrored, right? But it's a Google t-shirt. A huge corporation that makes billions and billions of dollars, of which there are many in this country. And we love to hate them. Well, we love to love them when we're using them, and then we love to hate them when we talk about how rich they are. And we start talking about the 1%ers and the 5%ers, many of whom sit at the head tables of a company like Google. Well, it's pretty hypocritical to say that you love iPhones and Google and communication and Netflix, Walmart, and all these great companies that have built this country, whether they're old companies, new companies, it doesn't matter. The point is that without those large companies, many of the things that we enjoy today simply wouldn't exist. I mean, you go back to the formation of the Industrial Revolution in this country. Without steel magnates, right, like Carnegie and guys like that, you wouldn't have the steel industry that you have, and you wouldn't have had the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution wasn't going to happen on the backs of 5 million individual people pouring ingots of steel. It required a tremendous amount of companies utilizing acres and acres of land and huge pieces of equipment to melt steel and turn this country into the Industrial Revolution and build cities like Los Angeles and New York and Dallas-Fort Worth, where I'm at. So you can love to hate them, but this country needed them to become the great country that we live in. So it's a bit hypocritical to say that these companies all suck, right? And that they're unfair and they're screwing people over. Now, it is fair to say that too much of the profits are going to the guys that sit at the head of the table, right? Once again, the real solution is in the middle of the road, isn't it? We can't penalize companies like that. Exxon is another example. Walmart, an example I already used. Google, Apple, huge businesses, the electric companies. I mean, the list goes on and on. The railroads. You could make a list if you sat down long enough and we made a game of it. We could come up with hundreds of companies that are Fortune 500, right? So there's at least 500 of them, right, that are making oogles and oogles of money, that have people sitting at the heads of the table or are the founders of those companies who are raking in billions and billions of dollars while there's poor people in this country. Yes, there needs to be some wealth redistribution, but you can do that in some really responsible ways, as opposed to the idea of saying these companies shouldn't exist. Can you imagine where we would be today if there was no Microsoft? If there was no Apple, I wouldn't even be making this video on this phone, which some of you would be glad about, right? So you get what I'm saying. Once again, the meeting is in the middle of the road. The compromise is in the middle of the road. You can't just say, we're going to take half of your money. Because if you say that, a guy like Steve Jobs would have never had the same motivation to do what he did. Now, he may have invented some of the things he invented, right? But once he wanted to turn that into a company like Apple, and he realized that you, as a socialist, were going to take 90% of what he made from that, well, then he would have just gone with a much smaller business model. And you wouldn't have had this incredible influx of iPhones in the United States. So do you get what I'm presenting here? There's no such thing as all the way over here and all the way over here. The reality is somewhere in the middle. And so, no more so is it fair to call a liberal an idiot or a dummy or a bleeding heart, right? Whatever you want to call them. That's not fair. They just want people to be taken care of. And I understand that. I get that. I want the same thing. And on the flip side of the coin, when a guy like myself or another conservative says, hey, it's not fair to take what people have made away from them. That's not an insane statement either. That's not any more of an insane statement than what the left makes. The meeting is in the middle, people. Chop, chop.